Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, the podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English.
Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. This is going to be a special mini-series, and I'll tell you why you can hear my printer going crazy in the background. So I'm taking a course with the wonderful Andre Hedlund, the Science of Learning and Teaching, and so my printer is now furiously trying to print out an article that I just, literally the session ended 13 minutes ago, and I'm trying to print the thing so I can read it. And yeah, I mean, it's gotten to this level of nerddom. I'm not sure if my mind, brain, and education friends are having a positive or negative influence. It's definitely a negative influence on my social life because I don't even go out anymore. I just want to read things. So one of the things that Andre asked us to do in this course was to create a science of learning repository. And it could take any form, and we just had to make a project, whether it was it has to be shared, pretty much is what it is, so that we can share some of our reflections, our perceptions of the course, and then ideas, and just kind of sharing, share the love, share the knowledge, right? So while this is printing, and I'm going to show it to you, and this is why I wanted to get into it first. Here's my reflections on the first session. Now, we had a 2-hour session, and I am going to share with you, this might be a little invasive, and it might be a little too much, so that you don't really want to know what goes on behind the scenes with me, but here we go. When I take courses and when I do anything, if you ever see me taking notes furiously, this is or my head is down, it's because I'm taking furious notes. I like to do it, though we did have, this point was brought up in our session today, that to actually learn something, taking notes and rereading notes is actually not the best way to retrieve. We have to retrieve information first, and then we can reference our notes. But I want to show you how a 2-hour session goes with Andre talking about the science of learning and all of the things that I got from the session. So let me share with you the craziness of Kelly. This article is quite long. I'm excited about it. Okay, so it is October 1st. Fun. So kicking off October with a fun course. And so, of course, I had to put what I had to do here. And then Andre started off with the Vitruvian Man and he gave some insight into who he was and how this course came about and how his interest into the science of learning developed, et cetera, et cetera. So throughout the course, which I love, the images are based on kind of this, Da Vinci mostly, but then also a Renaissance period. And so I can show you those. Oh, goodness. I'm actually kind of concerned about the length of this article. I think I can get through it, though. Maybe it's just the references? Oh, yeah, it's just the references. We're good. We're good. Don't worry. Okay. So he started off with the Vitruvian Man and talked about using the language of math to describe art and how Da Vinci was kind of this amazing genius, though he had an atypical brain, they suspect, in being able to describe the human form based on some mathematical principles and things like that. And so Andre was going to use the science of language. Look at how crazy I get. Language of science, the science of language, to elaborate on the art of teaching. So we broke the session down. This is going to bother me, so I'm just going to highlight this so I can go back. Sorry, people. This is how my brain works. I'm going to have to change that. Not going to do it now. So we broke everything down by the Pomodoro technique. So 25-minute working sessions and then 5 minutes of break. So we got a couple of little breaks. And I today happened to be baking bread, so it was kind of perfect because I could go check on the toast downstairs. It's delicious. So he jumped in and tried to make it really relatable with talking about Da Vinci and how, 500 years ago, he created things that are still being used today, especially in medical textbooks. All of it, though though slightly creepy because he was, in candlelight sketching dead bodies. They're still used today, but it was because he was really trying to figure out what was going on before he was able to do things like, his art, So, couple questions that he had posed to us, or that that rattled around in my head, was: are we looking into the science of learning prior to planning our lessons? I would speculate that most people are not. Because unfortunately, I think the science of learning is wholeheartedly overlooked. And I am a part of that camp, but I'm trying to rectify that now. So Da Vinci really got into the science before producing his work. And I don't think that, the question is, what are teachers doing to learn about the science to develop our work? Important question. So I'm trying to do it. Hopefully these series of videos will encourage you to also do it, and let's get better together. So let's try to strive to combine the sciences and the arts, right? So we talked about a little bit about the brain, how our brains are biased. When we investigate something, we need to apply and then assess afterwards. We tend to look at things through a filter of bias, and so we have to be aware that happens, and where we can reflect and then make appropriate applications. Again, he used the Renaissance because it was a period of joining science and the art to improve each field reciprocally, and it was a period of time where there was a lot of lateral or divergent thinking, where people were asking questions and testing things out. And this is something that we should be doing as well as teachers. Like, why are we doing what we're doing in the classroom? Okay, can we just even look that he put The Birth of Venus by Botticelli on the second slide of the course? First of all, love it. It's just like the colors and everything. I was excited. So the first session, which we had today, was the science of learning. And then we have 3 more sessions, which will go through desirable difficulties, dual coding, elaboration, concrete examples, and then planning with the science of learning. Excited about all of those sessions. So we jumped into first. Well, this is an article. It's a little small on my screen too. It's a little blurry, but this is an article that power went out. I'm back. Okay, so this is a little kind of small on my screen too, because it's a screenshot of you anyways. So Andre posited the question to us: what is the science of learning and where can we learn more about it? This is an article that he wrote. I'll see if it's available, then I can share it with everyone. If not, then you're kind of out of luck. Anyways, but if it's publicly available, then I'll for sure put it into the show notes so that you can go ahead and read it. What happens here is we were talking about, well, obviously what the science of learning is and what the science of learning is not, because the term neuroscience is sexy and everybody is using neuroscience. This is, again, kind of paraphrasing what we discussed in the session, that everybody is using that term because it seems as if it's definitive proof that something is going to work, especially when you see those people saying, oh, we can unlock your learning abilities and based on neuroscience and you'll learn 3, 5, 10 times faster. People buy into that, one, because they have a desperation of learning a language, but then also on top of that, whenever you see like neuroscience, people tend to think, well, then it's evidence and proof that this actually works. When in reality, neuroscience doesn't really have a lot to do. Okay, let me phrase this very carefully. Neuroscience is the scientific study of what's going on physically in the brain, right? And so, but to use those results and scientific studies and research and apply it into a classroom, you have to be very careful about what you're going to say, because it's not possible to say, well, we see this physical action happening in the brain, so therefore this is the correct formula to give a lesson. Not going to happen, right? So it's like you have to really be careful about that, and people fall into that trap. People also, teachers, I would say, fall into the trap of wanting to know that there is a correct formula of giving a lesson. I hate to break it to everybody. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And therefore, we have to think about, there's so many factors. And this is why mind, brain, and education is a fascinating field that I'm like really excited to like just stick my little toes into the water of, because I wrote it here. So the science behind the learning, and then mind, brain, and education is kind of like this multidisciplinary area that allows you to use the science of learning and then make it super practical. So this is the difference between neuroscience, brain, and science of learning. What's happening in the brain? How can we make that practical? And with the understanding, like the little asterisks up top saying, this might not be correct for everyone, because one of the things that we do know is that the brain is completely individual, and like though we have some things that are in similar regions and have similar structures and etc., your brain is individual. It's as individual as your face or your fingerprint or something like that. So not everybody, if you took my brain and your brain, it's not going to look the same. So, and also there's like billions of neurons and they're all wired differently anyways. Okay, so if anybody says, oh, neurologically speaking, it's neuroscience, you're definitely going to learn, just walk away. I don't know. Don't like curse them out. Just walk away. Then we kind of got into some of the parts of the brain just to kind of get into it. So for you to pay attention, and focus are really, really important in learning. So if you walk away from this episode with literally anything, you need to get your attention, the attention of your students, and they need to focus on something to be able to learn something. In order to do that, we have to activate the prefrontal cortex. And to do that, we also have to have some motivation. Motivation comes in the form chemically of dopamine, which there needs to have motivation for there to be some sort of action for you to actually do something. So dopamine is produced in the brainstem. It travels through I'm going to get these wrong, but I was taking notes, Andre. Just for you to know, I was a good student. The ventral tegmental area or segment, I'm not sure. And then it goes to the nucleus. I don't know. I just kind of put whatever I could remember here. And then anyways, it kind of follows this little path and then it floods your prefrontal cortex. And then dopamine creates the motivation to do something. This is what I've understood. If it's wrong, don't kill me. I'm just getting into this stuff. So so then we talked about, we'll end into long-term potentiation, which is pretty much that the more we retrieve, the stronger the networks become between these two things. And then that allows for things to if it's a stronger connection between in your neural network, it's easier for you to retrieve this information. So you want to have that constant strength. And neurons that fire together, wire together. So that is the slogan of the day in the brain. So we were talking about how to get some information before we're planning our lessons or thinking about what we do to make informed decisions. The two things that we had talked about, and I'm sure that there's a million other examples, was eliciting. It's based on activating prior knowledge, and this helps students strengthen those neural networks. Again, that's important. We want to have strong neural networks. That way we're able to retrieve this information. And the other example that we were talking about was think, pair, share. And this is based on, again, retrieval of information. So it needs to be done in that order, though. People have to think before you pair them and they share. You have to give them thinking time. And this is something that we don't usually do. We say, okay, you're going to think, pair, share. You two together, you guys together, head over to breakout rooms, however you do it. And then they're pairing and trying to think and then share it. It's a mess. So we have to give them time to think. And when they're sharing, they have to organize their ideas, which helps the long-term potentiation and long-term memory. I think this actually long-term memory, I'm not sure if I wrote that in right. It might be putting the wrong term. I was trying to listen and take notes at the same time. Anyways, Andre was encouraging us to look at every action we take and justify why we're doing the things that the way that we are. One of the things that you need to take into consideration is learning theories. So during the pandemic, he was working as a bilingual program mentor, and he went to many schools that were starting to say, well, we're going to be bilingual schools. And he went to a Montessori school in Brazil, and it was just not even Montessori, not even constructivist at all. So look at where because sometimes people say like, oh, I use the communicative method. Okay, fine, I accept. Do you know what the communicative method is? And how does that play out in your classroom? So this is why he's encouraging us to read to understand where these things come from, because you can't just say things. You have to kind of like know what you're talking about. Think about the strategies that you use. Like the itch to go back to your notes. Exactly what I'm doing right now. But I was thinking about it beforehand, Andre. Do not get angry at me. So according to the science of learning, this is bad. Because rereading ranks as one of the worst possible worst possible. Again, these are my notes as I'm typing like super quickly during the lesson. It's 5 pages also. 2 hours, I'm typing 5 pages out. I have issues, I know. It's one of the worst possible things for you to do because it creates this false, cognitives, anyways, the spelling is so bad. I'm so sorry. It creates this false sense of fluency, meaning that you have to do this. Like, if these are my notes, like I can't look at my notes first. I have to force my brain to retrieve things. And I made a post about this not so long ago, people, about retrieval practice. So before you have your students just look over your notes, and I worked with let me give you a perfect example of this. Hold, please. I worked with one of my students. He's a 16-year-old boy, and he was having severe difficulty in his regular school. Like, he was struggling, and his teacher, he was going for the after school, the plantão de dúvida, nothing was helping him. And I was just like, what is he doing? Like, what is going wrong? Because he's quite an intelligent boy. He can get through lessons. He makes connections very quickly. In my classes, minimally, he was doing fine. So I was thinking, well, what's going on in his regular school? And when I asked him, started probing around to figure out what was going on, I realized that for him to study, I said, well, tell me how you say. He goes, I study all the time. I'm constantly studying. I study for 3 hours. I said, it's okay. Tell me what you're doing to study. He was rereading his notes. There was no retrieval practice. Zero. Didn't happen. So this is one of the things that's really, really bad in terms of like, it's not going to help you. You can reread your notes 1,000,000 times over. The fact that you can't remember the things afterwards is quite obvious because you're not forcing your brain to actually do the thinking. So if your students can't remember stuff or they're having difficulty remembering things, maybe you want to break it down a little bit for them, not give them so much stuff to remember. But here's my recommendation or an idea that you could do. So take the whatever they had to deal with, whatever your lesson was on, whatever the class was on, then have them spend some time. I mean, this is not a novel idea Andre was talking about. Have them spend some time, notebook, digital thing, shared document, whatever, where they can't reference anything. And have them just put down what they remember. And one of the ways that you can help them, especially during class, like the first 5-10 minutes of class, say, okay, let's talk about what we had done last class. I'm going to give you some thinking time. Share your screen, because I work online, or sit at the table and give them a piece of paper, whatever. Share your screen and watch them type the things in, because then if they're sharing their screen, then you can see exactly if they're clicking off, clicking back on, and if they're referencing stuff. We don't want them to reference things. They need to force their brains to try and remember this stuff, because rereading stuff is not going to help you learn it. Okay. Then there's this, let me go back. That was a bit ranty. Here we go. Then we talked about primacy and recency, meaning the first and the last things are usually the things that stick out. And things that you can't remember are things that you need to prioritize. So if your students are, if you're using a shared document on an online class and they can remember some of the things at the beginning, some of the things at the end, or because that typically happens, or because there's a little section that is just muddled and they can't remember anything, then that's the thing that you need to go back and say, okay, so let's focus on this again. Let's try to get this again, so that they can start prioritizing that and we can highlight it. And then maybe we're, reinforcing those neural networks. Okay. Then he asked us for practical ideas and resources. One of the participants in the course said that unfortunately she has to kind of follow the book because of where she works. I mean, it's not really her fault, but like following the book, and I put it down here, this is not what she's doing, but she has to follow the book. So following the book blindly kind of is like, are we looking at the sequence? Are we, questioning? Like, listen, course book writers are great and they have a lot of knowledge and they do a lot of stuff. Okay, like course books we're not demonizing them, but at the same time, do we know why they're doing the sequence of things that they're doing? Do we know if that's the most effective way for our students to actually use that type of stuff? Anyways, and then I asked about, this one was mine, feedback, because I give feedback to my students. However, I started thinking as we were talking about this, that, that our brains are always looking for novelty. And that's the things, if we get people's attention, if we get people's focus, then it's good. And so I asked Andre about like routine. So when I give feedback, I try to vary the way that I give feedback, but it's always, it's always kind of standard. Like if they have a productive stage, then I'm going to give them feedback on it. If they do something, like I'm always going to give them feedback during their lessons. If you're not from Brazil, you don't know what that is. If you're from Brazil, you know exactly what that is. Guys, I live in a middle-class neighborhood. It's fine. Okay, so feedback. So what he was saying was that routine actually is not a bad thing, which makes sense. Like in the stages, obviously, like routine of stages, because what happens is it doesn't force them into this FFF response. It's pretty much the fight or flight response, and you just kind of shut down and you're panicking the whole time. So we don't want to force them into that. So routine is good when we're talking about stages, so they can kind of understand, okay, so usually I do an activity and then I get some feedback on it. But then you can vary the feedback, and you can vary the types of feedback. You can vary the way that you deliver the feedback, possibly questions that you ask about the feedback. We were talking about CCQs, concept checking questions to be able to verify that everything's okay. So the type of feedback can be varied, because then that creates the novelty, and then that gets the focus and attention, which is extremely important in the learning process. But routine is not necessarily bad, especially when we're talking about lower level learners. Younger children love routine and do very well in routine. We know this for a fact. So routine is not bad, and not everything needs to be shiny and flashy and everything else. So if you think of like the Pomodoro effect, the Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes and then 5-minute break. In your lessons, they should have like brain breaks. They should have time to kind of decompress for a moment. And one of the things that he said, which I heard also from the fabulous Mirella, oh gosh, I always forget how to say her last name. Hamasiotti. Sorry, I probably will say that wrong. Mirella, the wonderful Mirella from Mind Brain Education. She's the advisor for the Mind Brain Education. She was one of the founders, I should say, one of the founders of it. is that sharing the goals at the beginning of the lesson is a really good thing because it gives students some orientation and it reduces that affective filter or the FFF response. If you want to use Krashen's terms, the Krashen, affective filter, FFF response, more of the scientific thing. Anyways, it allows them to kind of like decompress a little bit because they know what's going to happen. So they know kind of what's expected of them. Oh God, there's just so much stuff here. Anyways, at the end, these are kind of like just my notes to myself. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it was just, there's a lot of things that I wanted to put in there. Anyways, there's no recipe. This is the thing that I wanted to throw out here, that there is no recipe for lessons. There's no recipe for learning. I say this frequently, but for some reason, it just keeps getting like, well, how should I do it? I don't know. What's your learning context? Who are your students? Blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like teachers at some point, we have to take this kind of ownership and responsibility. There's no recipe for this stuff. So we've got to get as much information as we can, as much training as we can, and then try and use things that are scientifically sound, like the science of learning, this type of stuff. And things that are reasonable and that work and just, and test things out and assess, sometimes it's going to work for some students. Sometimes it's not going to work for that student, but it might work for another student. Again, this is all very context specific. So too many factors: learning, cognition, psychology, emotion, nutrition. Geez, the things that children need to have the proper nutrition. It is a huge factor in their learning. So there is no recipe for lessons and for teaching. We have information. We have some universal truths. We have some good suggested practices based on the information that we currently have. But at the end of the day, you have to be a qualified professional that knows how to be flexible enough and reflective enough on your teaching practice to do good things. Last bit, I promise. So these were some of the books that Andre had suggested to our group to learn more about the science of learning. And so I wanted to share them, and I will link them in the show notes too. So if anybody is really interested in the science of learning, I think it's a really interesting field. And this is one of the reasons that I'm taking the course, is because, well, let me just tell you. So I've been teaching for a while now, and I feel relatively confident as a teacher, like in my abilities. Sometimes I feel terrible about myself, but most of the time I feel okay. Like I know I can handle myself. But at the same time, I realized that as I'm moving more and more of my demand is in teacher training and in mentorship and consultations and that type of thing, consultancies type work, that I need to be very well-versed and very clear about what I can provide in terms of assistance and support and resources for the teachers that I'm trying to help to develop. Because, and I've identified this as a factor that is something that I am not comfortable not being knowledgeable in. And so I think that, because I always try to go back, and whenever I have people, I always ask them, well, how do you think languages are learned? Well, what's your teaching philosophy? What's it? And all of this stuff is super important. And I realized that I actually really want to dig in a little bit more and get into the details and minutia of the science of learning, mind, brain, and education, even neuroscience. I would like to get into like, cognitive theories and things like that, because I have the basics, I feel, more or less, but I really do want to get into it and dig into the details, because I think that the more that I know, the more that I can support people, especially when they start coming to me with some some questions and they need advice and they need some guidance. And I think that that's really, really important for my development because it's so important for their development. And I'm really concerned about providing the best possible services that I can in terms of teacher training and developing good educators that feel confident in their abilities and are well-versed in a variety of different topics. Because at the end of the day, mind, brain, and education, I mean, that's what they're trying to do. And it's not to say, oh, you can't, focus on specialty things or do this or that. No, it's just that it's so multidisciplinary that you have to kind of dip into places that you feel uncomfortable with. So that's the whole motivation behind this. I've had a lot of insights on the first day. I've got 5 pages of notes. I won't reread them. I'll try and do my retrieval practice first. And then what we're going to be working on is this article. And it's awesome. Already. I haven't even read it. I read like the first page and I feel like it's awesome. Anyways, it's called Teaching the Science of Learning by, I'm going to go with Jana Weinstein, we'll say, Christopher Madden, and Megan Sumaraki. I'm not sure. I don't know their ethnicities or anything. So anyways, it's a great long 17-page article that has lots of wonderful little diagrams. I get really excited about this stuff now. I've been converted to the dark side of mind, brain, and education. I feel like it's just, I'm going to get into some stuff and I'm going to get real nerdy on you guys. I mean, look at, there's like diagrams of neurons and stuff and just, yeah, it's going to happen. But anyways, so this is my Science of Learning repository because Andre requested that we create something. And because I have a podcast, I thought it would be awesome to just podcast out the things that we're talking about, the things that we're looking into and discussing. Highly recommend trying to find this article if you can. I'll put the name of the article and the books that Andre recommended in the show notes because I think it's wonderful. If you have a chance, please consider, if it's possible, consider joining Andre's course, which I can link as well, or because I think he does run it a couple times, or an asynchronous course, or a course that is done by a qualified professional in the science of learning. So definitely recommend it for teachers just to start thinking about good practices that are evidence-based and not saying that your experience should be eliminated from the equation, because teachers are extremely important and our experience is invaluable to teaching, but also knowing a little bit of the sciences behind it, knowing a little bit of the evidence-based strategies, I think is just going to really complement what you're doing and help your students a little bit more. Or the teachers that you're training, because then you can they can glean insights from what you learn. That's it for today. Whew, a lot of stuff. Sorry, we had the printer going. There was fire. I'm just going to go quote unquote fireworks outside, power outages. So yeah, this is life, my friends. It's real talk in ELT. So it is very real today. And I will be back with another episode for this special mini series on the science of learning. This is my Science of Learning repository because I'm taking the Science of Learning and Teaching with Andre Hedlund at EDC Rocks if you want to get more information about it.
Ready to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. That's it for now. Take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.